According to most experts, the world's climate is changing. It is becoming warmer and wetter, and there are more extremes of weather. Potential effects of this climate change are likely to include more variable weather, stronger and longer heat waves, more heavy precipitation events, more frequent and severe droughts, more flooding and tropical storms, rises in sea level, and increased air pollution. We know that these climate changes are already affecting the environment in profound ways. The question is, how will these changes affect human health? We'll try to answer that question as we discuss the effect of climate change on public health on today's episode of A Public Health Journal.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal, a program that explores public health issues facing our society today and tomorrow. The host of the show is Dr. Ed Ellinger, Director and Chief Officer of Boynton Health Service, University of Minnesota. A Public Health Journal is sponsored by the Hennepin County Health Department, Boynton Health Service, the Minnesota Public Health Association, and the City of Minneapolis, all working together towards the goal of healthy people living in healthy communities.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal. Today we're going to look at the effect of climate change on public health. We know that the warming of the Earth's climate is having effect on plants, animals, water supplies, air quality, and the overall ecosystem. A stark example of the effect of these changes was the recent inclusion of polar bears on the endangered species list and a prediction that because of the loss of polar ice, the bears may be extinct by the year 2050. If climate change can have that impact on polar bears, what kind of impact will it have on humans? While no one knows the answer to that question for sure, people have started to look at ways to find the answer. To help us get started on a discussion about the impact of climate change in public health, I've invited Matt Commers to join us. Matt is a public policy program manager at Hennepin County Medical Center and an adjunct assistant professor in the Division of Environmental Health Sciences at the University of Minnesota School of Public Health. Matt, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Ed.
And despite the fact that this is going to have climate change is going to have a huge impact on human health, I assume, I've never had anybody on the program talking about it, so this is sort of a first step. So I'm glad you're here to do this.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
And are there very many people kind of paying attention to climate change and its effect on public health, or is this a relatively new field?
Well, I think both statements are true. It is quite new, and I think both for the field of public health as well as almost any professional or scientific endeavor, this theme of global climate change is quite a new one and quite a new confrontation in a sense. For the field of public health, that's obviously also the case. At the same time, it is certainly the case that there are many experts around the world now who've become very knowledgeable in various aspects of both climate change and its relationship with human health. So we're seeing the emergence of a new set of experts and professionals who are deeply or broadly or both trained in the relationship between the warming of the biosphere and its real and potential impact on human health.
Yeah, and as I try to do some research for this program, looking around for various data, a lot of people are saying this is what we need to look at, but there are not a whole lot of data to really support a change in this direction or another. Are you seeing data sources come up, really sound information about what's actually happening to the environment, particularly humans, as it relates to climate change?
Well, I think that's one of the things that we clearly struggle with all the time in public health, that ideally we would like to have 20 years of longitudinal data establishing a link between any given phenomenon and an outcome, a health outcome, before we would make pronouncements about causality. In this case, it presents us with something of a dilemma, because when we look at the climatological evidence, and what is hypothesized to be the changes in the atmosphere as we go forward in this coming century, we see that it would plausibly and very likely have significant health impact given our current understanding of what determines public health. However, the data is not yet present to establish causality on many levels. And so we're struggling with that dilemma from the perspective of our field and the standards that we like to hold ourselves to.
When we're talking about climate change, it's because that's going to be the basis of our discussion, what are we really talking about? What are the components of climate change that you're looking at?
Well, I think as climate change has come to be understood, we're generally referring to a warming trend in Earth's biosphere, which is the atmosphere, the air that we breathe, and everything around us in the thin layer of life on the crust of our planet Earth. As that biosphere warms, it has various effects on things that will impact our health, and we can talk about that in a moment. But certainly the overall concept has been one which is well documented. We know that the Earth's surface is warming due to the measurements that have been taken over the past 50 years, and in fact in many places in the world going back much further. The question and debate, of course, the past 15 years has focused on what the cause of that warming trend is. Obviously, many things have been discussed as potential causes, and I think our understanding continues to evolve on that level. However, the International Panel on Climate Change, as I think you know, which is the international body of scientists that have looked very seriously at the potential link between the emission of greenhouse gases and the warming of the climate, have determined that there is a 90% likelihood that the warming is largely attributable to human activity, and most notably the emission of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is of course the result of our use of fossil fuels, both for energy in terms of heating our homes and creating electricity, as well as of course transportation.
Well, and I know, so the facts are the environment is getting warmer. That seems to be pretty well accepted. I know there's a little bit of discussion, and some people dispute the fact that humans have played a role in that, but we won't get into that because we want to really say whatever the cause, human cause or non-human cause for the warming of the environment, what kind of impact is it going to have? And what are we seeing on the kind of the physical nature, not among humans? What kind of things? Are we seeing more storms? Are we seeing rising of sea level? Are we seeing ice caps disappearing? What kind of things are we seeing in our environment?
Well, I think just briefly going back to the previous point, I would simply like to reiterate that it looks like the evidence is indicating and overwhelmingly that the changes in the atmosphere that we're seeing are human-induced. However, as a scientist, one would always want to maintain some level of skepticism, even about the data which we believe is absolutely firm in regards to the warming of the atmosphere. We need to maintain vigilance and continue to monitor that going forward to see if our hypotheses indeed play out as we expect they will. We also need to continue to maintain our scientific vigilance as regards the underlying causes of that and continue to monitor if and explore that relationship. Now, the outcomes that we're seeing, of course, I think some of the things that have grabbed the attention of the media are such things as the melting of the polar ice cap, the warming of the atmosphere itself, the shifting of disease vectors such as mosquitoes and other biological disease vectors. And we can certainly talk about more things which will have very likely a profound impact on health. But I guess to do a review, you might think along the lines of we're seeing changes in air and in terms of what the air carries. So that would refer, for instance, to airborne allergens. We're seeing changes in the level of pollution and stagnant air, especially in large metropolitan areas. We are certainly seeing changes in access to clean, potable water, and we are seeing shifts in agricultural production. I think if you listen carefully, interestingly, this past year, as we've seen the rise in food prices, especially rice across the world, if you listen carefully to the media messages, you'll often hear not only economic reasons why the price of rice has gone up, but as well, very often you'll hear storms mentioned as one of the causes. So bad weather, at least in this case, has been a cause of a reduction in rice supply. We know as well that the creation of ethanol has led to scarcity in the supply of corn. And for a number of these reasons, food prices have risen.
All right, so with that as kind of a good lead-in, we'll sort of talk about the next step is how do these weather changes affect human health. But first we need to take a little break. We'll be back right after this message.
Massive heat waves.
Heat waves.
Tick. Severe droughts.
Tick, tick.
Tick, tick, tick.
Devastating
tick,
hurricanes.
Tick, tick, tick,
Tick, tick, tick,
tick. Our future is up
tick, tick,
to you.
tick.
Go to fightglobalwarming.com while there's still time.
Welcome back. We're talking about the impact of climate change and public health with Matt Commerce from the Division of Environmental Health Sciences in the School of Public Health at the University of Minnesota. So Matt, we kind of talked a little bit about the fact that the climate is getting warmer. We're having more and more environmental effects, and I think people are knowing that the ice caps are melting, and I mentioned in my introduction that polar bears are being threatened. But what about people? How are these things affecting people? And where would we want to start even to think about how they affects people?
Well, let's start with the simple fact of heat. We know that thermal stress is a major issue, especially for vulnerable populations. As the temperature of the air goes up, especially in warmer seasons, we will see that the most vulnerable among us, most specifically elderly persons and people who do not have access to cooling, such as air conditioning units, will be at greater risk for the results of thermal stress. That's one mechanism by which climate change has already influenced human health across the world.
Well, I know that in some of the U.S. cities, buildings were built 100 years, 150 years ago for a certain kind of climate. And so we have a lot of infrastructure of buildings, and now in places like St. Louis or Kansas City, even Chicago, increasing number of deaths during the summer among elderly when they don't have air conditioning.
Absolutely. In 1995, there was an extraordinary heat wave in Chicago, which is considered to have been responsible for over 700 deaths. I think people around the world were aware of the extreme summer heat in Europe in 2003. The French keep, of course, extraordinarily good data on mortality, and their epidemiologists were able to show that the death of over 50,000 people in France during that summer is directly attributable to the heat. Now, whether that particular incident of heat is due to climate change, of course, is something that could be debated, and we'll never have a definitive answer. Where we will receive our definitive answers over time in looking at the frequency of those types of heat events as well as the duration and intensity. As we get more and more data on those events, we'll be able to see trends over time.
Now then, that temperature must affect air quality. You had mentioned that a little bit earlier. How is air quality affected by increasing temperature?
Well, absolutely, Ed, and that's the second area I wanted to talk about is air quality. We have just recently in this past year experienced in the Twin Cities here an inversion event. Now, this is not an unprecedented event by any means, but it is predicted that the changes that are predicted in air quality across the United States would include more types of stagnant air events, so that we would be seeing increases in pollution. Now, among the health impact of that is, of course, if we look at asthma, persons suffering from asthma, and most especially children who spend a good portion of their day outside, will be impacted by that lower quality air. Another impact of the changes in air quality due to climate change is an increase, according to the Centers for Disease Control, in airborne allergens. And we know, of course, that people who suffer from airborne allergies would then be impacted quite negatively by an increase of that kind.
Now, why would allergens increase in the air?
That specific aspect of climate science is not an area that I've done any deep work in, so I can't tell you exactly. However, that does come from a very reliable source, Howard Frumpkin at the Centers of Disease Control, who is the head of their Environmental Health Sciences Division.
I would suspect that as we get a little bit warmer, more things will grow, and as we have more growth, it'll leave off some of the pollens, things that are changing over the years. And then the whole stagnation of air, is that because we don't have the currents or the changing currents, or because one of the things is we have more storms, more frequent storms, more severe storms? Why are we going to get the stagnant air?
Well, again, Ed, I'm struggling myself to come to grips with the enormous breadth of this public health issue. And to a large extent, that's a question that a climatologist would need to answer for you. Where I've tried to focus my energy at this point is looking at the climatological evidence and looking at what our best sources of information have predicted will happen in our atmosphere, and then to look at what the health impact of that is likely to be.
What about water? So you got air, you got increased allergens and stagnant air with pollutants. What about water, which is another big component?
Absolutely, and perhaps one of the very biggest. Ultimately, air is a more immediate impactor of health at some level than water over time, but water is such a powerful influence upon our health in so many different ways that will inevitably be a pathway by which climate change impacts public health. We've known now for decades that there is a process of desertification occurring across the world. That has many causes, of course, including land overuse and soil depletion, but some of it is due to increased temperatures as well. As this occurs, we'll see certain regions having greater and greater difficulty accessing both clean and potable water. For communities that have significant access to economic resources, they should be able to deal with this in most cases. However, the price will go up. Where the real concern comes in from a public health standpoint is among those persons with already marginal access to sufficient water supply and sufficiently clean water, because that access will continue to be restricted for those individuals.
I think just more recently when we've had the typhoon in Myanmar, and from what I understand, the storm surge came and flooded a lot of the rice fields, because you were talking about the cost of rice and that it was related to certain tropical or environmental events, and that not only affected their water, but you now have the rice in salt water, which is sort of incompatible. Is this the kind of thing that we'll be seeing around the world?
It is possible. I don't dare to make predictions about the frequency of such storms like that or Hurricane Katrina. There's certainly been a debate raging the past years since 2005 about whether or not Katrina could be partially or largely attributable to climate change. And I think, again, the only way we're going to know that type of thing for certain is over time as we measure the frequency and intensity of those storms. However, what can be said is that climatologists looking seriously at the global climate change issue do anticipate, based on their data, that tropical storms and the intensity of those will increase, as well as severe weather events, even in places like here in Minnesota.
All right, well, I'm going to talk about infections in particular, but first we need to take another little break. We'll be back right after this message.
Listen up, energy hogs. Get in there and waste some energy.
There's no insulation, boss. It's hog heaven.
Time to tan.
Keep wasting. They'll never know what hit them.
What the?
Boss, they're home, and they've got energy-efficient bulbs. Ah!
You've got the power to get rid of energy hogs. You can add insulation and lots of other things. Get the tips you need at energyhog.org and play fun games, too. Get the energy hogs out of your home.
Hey, wait for me!
Welcome back. We're talking about climate change and its effect on public health with Matt Commers from the School of Public Health at the University of Minnesota. Matt, in the time that we have in this last segment, I want to make sure that we talk about sort of infectious diseases, food, and then kind of the mental health impacts of all of this. So kind of take those in maybe in that order or whatever order you'd like. What's happening with food supply, with infectious disease, and what impact it has on mental health?
Well, in terms of infectious disease, we know that as the climate warms, disease vectors will have new ranges. So for instance, mosquitoes, which are the primary vector for the transmission of malaria, have been able to spread into new areas in southern Europe as a result of the warming. This is then exposing populations which have not previously been exposed to malaria to the malaria parasite. Malaria being the world's #1 killer, it's a very important public health issue from that standpoint. Here in the United States, we've of course seen the spread of West Nile virus, and through into Minnesota, in fact, which is a disease that did not exist here when I was a child. We do expect that with the continuing change in the climate, we will be seeing continual changes in the range of infectious disease vectors. So that will be a major issue. In terms of food supply, I think it's important to go back to the example on rice, that we consider, and this is one of the very important things in terms of our public health thinking about climate change, we need to think in a multi-causal way, in a holistic systems way, about our relationship to the total ecology and how dependent we are on the earth for our continued survival and health. One of the ways in which climate change may impact our health is simply in the way that it impacts our ability to produce large quantities of food. At this time, the world is actually producing more food per capita than it did in the 1970s, when there were many people predicting that we would not have enough food for everybody by the beginning of this century. However, that does not necessarily mean that this is a sustainable increase. We have depleted a great deal of topsoil and have, in some ways, undermined our ability to continue to increase our output of food. When you throw on top of that severe weather events, such as what happened in the southeast of the United States last summer, severe drought, we can start to see real problems in our ability to meet our food needs, and that can be part and parcel with the climate changes. Lastly, I think it's very important that we not forget mental health and the potential impact of something like climate change on the mental health of our population. We know that approximately 10% of adults in the United States suffer from major depression at some point in their life, as well as in the high teens for anxiety. An event like climate change is so seemingly insurmountable and difficult to comprehend that for people who are already predisposed to depression or anxiety, for instance, this can be a source of great exacerbation of those symptoms. As well, it deserves special note, and I discussed this issue with Jonathan Patz, who is a professor at the University of Wisconsin recently, that children are also particularly vulnerable to messages of doom and gloom about our future. So we need to be, as public health professionals, vigilant about that. We need to make sure that we're discussing those aspects of this that are also hopeful, because there are many reasons for hope as well. And I think certainly we need to avoid the kind of historical hubris that every generation seems to have in regards to its major challenges. We need to look back over history and understand that all generations have faced challenges that they felt were potentially insurmountable, and yet we're still here today.
Yeah. Well, recently I reread Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, and they talked about the Dust Bowl, and it raises one of the issues. There was a huge migration of people at that point in time, and I suspect after Katrina, a lot of people left New Orleans and Louisiana, went to Texas and went to other places. Are the people thinking about this, thinking about those massive population changes and the impact that'll have on health?
Well, I think that you're getting at the very last area that I think is important to talk about in the relationship between climate change and health, and that is indeed that in order to maintain health at the populational level, people need access to a safe, stable environment. And when you remove that factor, we see health challenged on all sides. So as we see flooding, which is anticipated to occur along many coastlines in the world due to rising sea levels, or as we see larger or more frequent storms, we may be confronted by larger mass migration activity across the world as a result of climate change. This brings a myriad of potential health problems to people, and certainly that will have to be part of our planning. How to deal with situations where a given environment literally becomes, for a given time, unlivable.
So who's dealing with this problem? Well, it's a relatively new phenomenon. It's really not snuck up on us, but all of a sudden confronted us with not a lot of planning. Who's working on this whole issue of climate change and its effect on human health?
Well, I certainly think that it deserves to be noted that the United Nations, in forming the International Panel on Climate Change, and then of course all of the thousands of scientists who participated on the International Panel and were given the Nobel Prize this year as a result, they should be given significant credit for their work in this area. We have a number of distinguished people working right here in the Midwest. I mentioned Dr. Jonathan Patz at the University of Wisconsin. We, of course, are also very privileged to have Dr. Dave Tillman at the St. Paul campus here, who is an extraordinary world expert on climate change and its impact on ecology. We also have Elizabeth Wilson working at the Humphrey Institute right here on the policy acceptability and safety of carbon sequestration and storage, the process of actually taking carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it. What are the safety issues involved with that, etc. So right in our midst, there are many people working on issues to link the science with health outcomes and to address them in terms of both the two major strategies being mitigation, that is, actually correcting the climate problem, and adaptation, helping us to live with the effects of climate change.
Well, Matt, this has been really informative. I'm going to have you come back and get into a little more detail on some of these topics, because they're certainly going to be huge factors of what we deal with in public health. Thanks for being with us. I'll be back with a closing comment right after this message.
Most Americans don't realize that their household energy use produces twice as much pollution as the family car, or that America emits more than 25% of the world's greenhouse gases. But it's easier now than ever before to reduce energy waste at home and make the air a little cleaner. You might even save some money. Call this toll-free number for simple steps to make your home more energy efficient. It's easy when you know how.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, has noted that the planet's climate is changing, and these changes are likely to affect human health. In response to that, the CDC has listed some steps that individuals, families, and communities can take to prepare for these changes. 4 specific recommendations deserve special attention because they are things that we can actually do. These are: 1. Eat differently. Prepackaged and fast foods use a large amount of materials and energy to produce. Eating locally grown food will help reduce that energy use and also provide healthier food options. 2. Travel differently. Walk, bike ride, and use mass transportation as much as possible. This will reduce fuel consumption and decrease air emissions, along with improving one's fitness level. Another side effect of this will be the creation of safer walking and biking areas that improve the overall quality of our communities. 3. Go green at home and at work. This means doing whatever you can to reduce, reuse, recycle, and conserve the energy and the material things in your life. And finally, be prepared. Many of the potential health effects of climate change are related to threats we already face, including heat waves, extreme weather events, and emerging infectious diseases. These threats may seem overwhelming, but taking preparedness steps now can help to keep you and your family safer and healthier when they do occur. These are things that each of us can do to help slow climate change and prepare for any changes that may lie ahead. These are among the most important things that we can do in our lives because they not only affect our individual health, but the health of our families and all of humanity now and far into the future. That is true public health work. Thanks for watching. I hope you can join us again next time on A Public Health Journal.